Mr. Agnew and then Mr. Capoulas-Santos.
Chairman, thank you. Well, I'd just like to reinforce what Albert Dess said. On the one hand, we have the European Union saying we must take land out of production. On the other hand, the same people are saying we need more people, young people in agriculture. The two don't actually knit together. And although the numbers of farmers, farmer businessmen is reducing, then the area of land they're farming isn't reducing unless the EU tells them it has to reduce. All that's happened is that we now use methods in farming that need less labour. It is as simple as that. We just don't need so many hands and feet on the land to farm it as effectively as we used to do, because tractors are getting bigger, etc., etc. And another reason that there were so many farmers in Europe, and in my opinion not really doing a full-time job, is that it was so easy to get into dairying 40 years ago. You could build up to about 15, 20 cows and you had some sort of a living, and the market has now taken all that away. If you look at potato growing, that used to be all done by hand. In my own lifetime, I employed people to pick potatoes by hand and plant them by hand. That's all stopped now. I think there was something missing from the presentation when you were talking about how to get into farming. The best way to get into farming, if you're an outsider, is to marry a holding. That's the best way of doing it. And if you're a young man who's determined to do it, there are all sorts of couples who've just got a daughter. And I've seen this as well through my life. That is the surest way of doing it. And I think that should have been included in the presentation, because it happens in real life. It really does happen. But there is another way of getting into farming. As farmers get older and they're less physically able to do the work, they take on a young chap, either as a sharecropper or as a contract milker, and that person slowly works their way into the business, and this happens in New Zealand. I'm now going to put the three Green Group MEPs into a dilemma. In effect, we have had what you could say from the point of view of the labour market as a beneficial crisis in the European Union, the death of trees. Oak trees, elm trees and ash trees through diseases. These trees need to be replanted, and they need to be replanted quite quickly. However, you need to replant them with trees that will not get these diseases. There are trees around the world that naturally don't get them. Why not transfer the gene from those trees that don't get these diseases into the ones that do? Yeah, they're all throwing their hands in the air. Can I remind you three chaps, you green lads, you don't eat trees. So the sooner we put our brains to work to get resistant trees, then we can put our muscles to work in planting them. And I leave you with that thought, because if you want to subsidise people in rural areas, for goodness sake, have them doing something useful. Thank you.
And on Mr Agnew's point, I'll come back to him offline.
Okay.
I think the last point I would just refer to Mr Agnew's comments about if somebody wants to farm, to marry a woman with land, I think was his general point. But it might also be worth saying that women also farm. And in fact, in many member states, because of smaller families, there will be an increasing number of women inheriting land. And I think that's going to be interesting to see what impact that has on agriculture and food.
It was very nice to hear from our colleague from the UK, and this is an example we've seen in films, but the reality is different. The recovery rate in Spain and UK are very, very low, unlike Germany, which is almost 100. I mean, Germany doesn't have that problem. In some eastern countries, the recovery rate is very low. UK, same thing. So what are we talking about? Talking about that there is a real medium-term problem. I'm trying to work in many of the themes, but I may overlook some others. But it's not just to have a sectoral view of the problem. Those of us who work with rural and agricultural economy are used to hearing, you can't do anything without agriculture. It's true, but it's less and less true. Agriculture is very important. Nobody's calling that into question. But in many areas, other activities, and other activity is not just a complement to agriculture, it's other activities that are absolutely necessary to make sure that agriculture can survive. And those activities need to be supported. That's fundamental.